Here's a question that nobody in U.S. intelligence wants to answer. How is Nicolás Maduro still in power? March 2020. Trump puts a $15 million bounty on his head, the highest bounty ever offered for a head of state. May 2020, a group of American mercenaries launches a botched invasion attempt. They're caught on a beach. It's humiliating. January 2021, Trump leaves office. Maduro is still there. January 2023, Biden is president. Maduro is still there. January 2024, Venezuela's opposition tries another challenge. Maduro crushes it. Today, 4 years after the bounty was announced, Nicolás Maduro walks around Caracas freely. He gives televised speeches, he meets with foreign leaders, he tweets, and that $15 million reward, nobody's claimed it. So what went wrong? Why couldn't the most powerful country in the world remove a socialist dictator from a collapsing country 500 miles from Florida? The answer isn't what you think. It's not about Maduro being smart. It's not about Venezuela being strong. It's about something far more disturbing. The complete collapse of American regime change capability in a world where Russia and China will protect anyone who opposes Washington. This is the story of the bounty that failed and what it revealed about the new rules of global power. March 26, 2020. The Department of Justice press room in Washington was packed. Reporters knew something major was coming. You don't get the Attorney General, the DEA Administrator, the FBI Director, and Homeland Security Investigations Chief all together unless it's significant. William Barr stepped to the podium at exactly 11 a.m. He looked serious. Grim, even. Behind him was a projection screen showing the seal of the Department of Justice. Today, Barr began, the United States is announcing charges against Nicolás Maduro Moros, the illegitimate ruler of Venezuela, for narco-terrorism, drug trafficking, narco-terrorism conspiracy, and weapons offenses. The room stirred. This wasn't unprecedented. The U.S. had charged foreign leaders before, Panama's Manuel Noriega in the 1980s, but Noriega was eventually captured and brought to trial. This felt different. Barr continued. For more than 20 years, Maduro and his co-conspirators have overseen and engaged in a narco-terrorism partnership with the FARC. They've used cocaine as a weapon to flood the United States with this poison. Then came the part that made headlines worldwide. The Department of State is offering rewards of up to $15 million for information leading to the arrest and conviction of Nicolás Maduro. The screen behind Barr changed. Maduro's face appeared. Official photo, serious expression, next to the number $15,000. He looked like a wanted poster from the Old West, except this was the 21st century and this was a sitting president. In the back of the room, a reporter raised her hand. Mr. Attorney General, how exactly do you plan to arrest a head of state who controls an army? Barr's answer was careful. We have multiple avenues. The Venezuelan people themselves may choose to act. Regional partners may assist. We have confidence that justice will be served. It was a non-answer, because the truth was, they didn't know. This wasn't a carefully planned operation with a clear endgame. This was political theater designed to increase pressure on Maduro. The thinking in the Trump administration was simple. Offer enough money, make enough noise, and someone close to Maduro, a general, an aide, a bodyguard, would betray him. It had worked before. Betrayal is how most dictators fall. But Maduro wasn't most dictators. 2,000 miles south, in the Miraflores presidential palace in Caracas, Maduro's chief of staff burst into a meeting. Maduro was sitting with Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez and several Cuban intelligence advisors. They were discussing the country's response to COVID-19, which was beginning to spread globally. Mr. President, the aide said, breathless, the Americans just indicted you. They're calling you a drug trafficker. They put a $15 million bounty on your head. The room went silent. Everyone looked at Maduro. How would he react? Fear, anger, panic. Maduro smiled. Then he laughed, a genuine amused laugh. They think I'm worth $15 million, he said. I'm flattered. That's more than they offered for bin Laden at first. Defense Minister Padrino wasn't laughing. Mr. President, this is serious. This isn't just rhetoric. They're preparing something. We need to increase your security immediately. Maduro waved him off. Vladimir, relax. Trump is desperate. His country is collapsing from coronavirus. His economy is in freefall. His re-election is in danger. This is a distraction, political noise. But one of the Cuban advisors, a man named Manuel, wasn't so sure. He'd been in the room when similar bounties were placed on other leaders. Nicolás, the Americans are serious about this. They've coordinated with the DEA, FBI, and military intelligence. This isn't just Trump talking, this is institutional. Maduro's expression hardened. Then let them come. Let them try. They've been trying to remove me since 2013. Sanctions, sabotage, assassination attempts, recognition of that puppet Guaido. Nothing worked. This won't work either. He stood up and walked to the window overlooking Caracas. The city sprawled below, chaotic and struggling, but still his. Schedule a television address, Maduro said. Tonight. I want every channel. I want the people to see that I'm not hiding. I'm not afraid. And I want Trump to see it too. That night, at 8 p.m. Venezuelan time, Nicolás Maduro appeared on every television station in the country. He wasn't in his usual suit. He was wearing military fatigues. Behind him stood a dozen generals in full uniform, a show of force, a demonstration of loyalty. Maduro held up a printout, a screenshot from the Department of Justice, website showing his wanted poster. Donald Trump, Maduro said, staring directly into the camera, has put a price on my head. $15 million. He calls me a narco-terrorist. He calls me a criminal. He thinks he can buy me like some common criminal. He paused for effect. I have a message for Donald Trump. If you want me, come and get me yourself. Venezuela is not Iraq. We are not Libya. We will not be invaded. We will not surrender, and I will not run. The generals behind him applauded. Supporters watching at home cheered. But outside Venezuela, the speech landed differently. Diplomats were shocked by the brazenness. Intelligence analysts were confused. This wasn't how wanted men behaved. This wasn't the script. But Maduro understood something they didn't. In the 21st century, regime change doesn't work the way it used to, not when you have the right friends, and Maduro had cultivated very powerful friends. Within hours of the bounty announcement, 3 countries issued statements. Russia's foreign ministry called the charges illegal and provocative interference. They reminded the world that Russia had military advisors and weapons systems in Venezuela. China's foreign ministry spokesperson said the charges violated international norms of non-interference. China had loaned Venezuela over $60 billion and wasn't about to let that investment collapse. Cuba, Venezuela's closest ally, was more direct. Any attempt to remove President Maduro will be considered an act of war against the Bolivarian alliance. These weren't empty statements. They were warnings, and the Trump administration heard them. But Trump was undeterred, or at least he appeared to be. Behind the scenes, conversations were happening in the Pentagon, the CIA, and the State Department. Could they actually arrest Maduro? What would it take? The CIA produced a classified assessment. It outlined several scenarios. Scenario 1, internal coup. A Venezuelan general betrays Maduro and hands him over to U.S. authorities. Probability: low. Every general with access to Maduro was either loyal or benefiting from corruption. The military controlled the drug trade, the oil industry, and the import economy. They were getting rich. Why would they give that up? Scenario 2. Special operations raid. U.S. forces enter Venezuela, capture Maduro, and extract him. Probability: extremely low. Venezuela wasn't Iraq. It had a functioning air defense system supplied by Russia. It had Cuban intelligence embedded at every level, and most importantly, it had Russian and Chinese backing. A U.S. raid would trigger an international crisis. Scenario 3. Regional coalition. Colombia, Brazil, and other neighbors cooperate to pressure or remove Maduro. Probability: low. While these countries opposed Maduro, none wanted a military conflict on their doorstep, and none wanted to appear as American proxies. Scenario 4. Paid opposition fund and support Venezuelan opposition forces to capture Maduro. Probability: unknown. This was the most realistic option. This was the path they chose. Enter Jordan Goudreau. Goudreau was a 43-year-old former U.S. Army Green Beret. He'd served in Iraq and Afghanistan. After leaving the military, he'd started a private security company called Silvercorp USA. It was small, barely profitable, operating out of Florida. Goudreau did security for events, VIP protection, nothing major. But Goudreau had bigger ambitions. He wanted to be the next Eric Prince, founder of Blackwater. He wanted to be a player in the world of private military contractors. And when he heard about the Maduro situation, he saw an opportunity. Goudreau started making connections with Venezuelan exiles in Miami and Colombia. He met with defected Venezuelan military officers. He pitched them a plan, a small covert invasion. Land on the Venezuelan coast with a team of mercenaries and ex-soldiers. Move inland, link up with opposition groups. Capture or kill Maduro. Collect the $15 million bounty. Simple. The Venezuelan exiles loved it. They were desperate for action. Years of protests and political opposition had gone nowhere. They wanted something dramatic. Goudreau claimed he had U.S. government backing. He showed them what he said were preliminary agreements. He talked about CIA connections. It was vague, but it was enough. People wanted to believe. What those Venezuelan exiles didn't know was that Goudreau's CIA connections were mostly wishful thinking. The CIA had been briefed on his plan and had walked away. It was amateurish, poorly planned, and doomed to fail. The agency wanted nothing to do with it. But Goudreau pushed forward anyway. He recruited about 60 men, some former Venezuelan soldiers, some mercenaries, a few American ex-special forces. They trained in Colombia. The plan was to launch from the Colombian coast, land in Venezuela, and make their way to Caracas. The operation was called Operation Gideon. It launched on May 3, 2020. It failed within hours. The boats they used were small fishing vessels. The equipment was minimal. The intelligence was outdated. Venezuelan military intelligence had infiltrated the planning from the beginning. They knew exactly when and where the invasion would happen. As Goudreau's men approached the Venezuelan coast, near the town of Macuto, they were met by Venezuelan military forces. There was a brief firefight. 8 of the mercenaries were killed, the rest scattered. Over the next 2 days, Venezuelan forces hunted down and captured nearly all of them. Among those captured were 2 American ex-Green Berets, Luke Denman and Aaron Berry. They'd been promised big paydays by Goudreau. Instead, they were paraded on Venezuelan television, confessing to being part of a U.S.-backed invasion attempt. Maduro held a press conference. He was gleeful. Donald Trump tried to invade Venezuela. His mercenaries have been captured. This is Trump's Bay of Pigs. This is his greatest failure. In Washington, the Trump administration scrambled to distance itself from the operation. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo held an emergency press briefing. We had nothing to do with this. This was not a U.S. government operation. But the damage was done. The world saw American mercenaries captured on a beach, confessing on camera. It was humiliating. And it made Maduro look strong. He'd faced down the United States and won. The $15 million bounty suddenly seemed meaningless. If America's best option was a ragtag group of mercenaries and fishing boats, what did that say about American power? But there was more to Maduro's survival than a failed invasion. There was a deeper structural reason why regime change had become nearly impossible. When the United States sanctioned Venezuela's oil, China bought it. When the U.S. froze assets, Russia provided loans. When the U.S. tried diplomatic isolation, Cuba, Iran, and Turkey stepped in. The world had changed. Maduro had learned the lesson of Saddam and Gaddafi. They fell because they were isolated, so he systematically built a coalition of anti-American states who saw his survival as their own. More importantly, he made himself indispensable to the people keeping him in power. Venezuelan generals controlled cocaine trafficking. They skimmed oil revenues. They ran import monopolies. Removing Maduro meant losing those streams, so the military needed him alive. Cuba needed Venezuela's cheap oil to survive. So Cuban intelligence officers embedded in Maduro's government weren't just advisors. They were protectors. They ran his security. They controlled surveillance. They identified threats before they materialized. By the time Trump announced the bounty, Maduro had built a survival apparatus that was nearly impenetrable. But there was one more element to his survival: the opposition's own failures. In January 2019, Trump had recognized Juan Guaido, a 35-year-old opposition politician, as Venezuela's legitimate president. 50 countries followed. It seemed like Maduro's end was near. Except Guaido had recognition but no power. He couldn't pay soldiers, he couldn't control police, he couldn't govern. Recognition meant nothing without the ability to enforce it. By 2020, Guaido's movement had collapsed. The strategy had failed completely. Meanwhile, Maduro cracked down harder, arrested opposition leaders, banned parties, held sham elections. He wasn't governing for international legitimacy, he was governing for survival. January 20th, 2021, Trump left office, Biden became president, Maduro was still there. The new administration tried back-channel negotiations, offered sanctions relief for elections. Maduro strung them along, made promises, held meaningless talks. Nothing changed. The bounty was still active, but nobody believed it mattered anymore. In 2024, Venezuela held another presidential election. The opposition once again believed they could win. The polls showed them ahead. International observers documented fraud. Maduro won anyway. Protests erupted. Dozens were killed. Thousands were arrested. And Maduro remained. 4 years after the bounty was announced, nobody had claimed it. Nobody had even tried. The Venezuelan generals who might have betrayed Maduro were too rich and too compromised. The opposition was too weak and too divided, and the international community had moved on. Maduro walks through Caracas today not because he's beloved. His approval ratings are abysmal. Not because Venezuela is thriving. The economy has collapsed by 80% and millions have fled. He remains because he understands the new rules of 21st century power. In the old world, American pressure could topple governments. Sanctions could cripple economies. Bounties could incentivize betrayal. But in the new multipolar world, where Russia and China offer alternatives to American systems, where authoritarian leaders protect each other, where criminal revenue streams can sustain regimes, traditional tools of regime change don't work anymore. The $15 million bounty on Maduro's head wasn't a failure of intelligence or planning. It was a failure of relevance. It assumed that money and pressure could still remove a dictator. It assumed that American power still functioned the way it did in the 1990s. But Maduro proved otherwise. He showed that if you can survive the first wave of sanctions, if you can find alternative patrons, if you can make yourself essential to the people keeping you in power, you can outlast American pressure. You can outlast American presidents. You can even outlast American attention spans. The wanted poster is still on the Department of Justice website. Maduro's face, the $15 million figure, the list of charges, it's all still there. But it's become a monument to a different kind of failure. A failure to understand that the world has changed, that American power has limits, that dictators have learned to adapt. And Nicolás Maduro, the former bus driver who was never supposed to last more than a few months in power, has become the symbol of that new reality. Not because he's strong, not because he's popular, but because he's figured out how to survive in a world where survival is all that matters. Trump is gone, Biden came and went, another American election is coming, but in Caracas, Maduro will still be there, walking the halls of Miraflores, giving speeches, tweeting, living proof that being America's most wanted doesn't mean what it used to. The bounty failed, not because it wasn't enough money, not because it wasn't serious, but because in 2020 the United States learned a lesson it didn't want to learn. You can't regime change your way out of a problem when the world has decided it doesn't need your permission anymore. If this story revealed how American power has changed in ways most people don't want to admit, hit that subscribe button, share it with someone who still thinks the U.S. can simply remove leaders it doesn't like. Drop a comment about whether you think Maduro will ever face justice or if he's proven that dictators can survive anything if they have the right friends. And ring that notification bell for more untold stories about how the rules of global power are being rewritten right in front of us.